I can only, standing where I am, wish that all of the seats were filled. We're here this afternoon, as has already been publicly promoted, for two comprehensive presentations on the Amaila Falls project. I think it's fair to say the most important development project that this country has in its history engaged itself in. To my right is the Blackstone and Sithe Global representatives. And I will introduce them and just ask them to stand when I do so that you know who they are. Mr. Sean Kimsack. Sean is the Senior Managing Director of Blackstone. Blackstone is the parent company of Sithe Global. And I imagine that Sean will say something about that. Brian Kubrick. Brian is the president of Sithe Global and will be leading the team presenting on behalf of Sithe Global. Jim, is it McGowan? Vice President of Sithe Global. And Justin, I did not get your name, your last name. Schwartz. Justin, he's also Vice President of Sithe Global. To my left is Mr. Winston Brassington, who you all know extremely well. And he is the technical team leader for the government of Guyana on this project. Next to Winston is Mr. Stephen Good, who is a leading consultant to the project. And next to him is Mr. Kapil Mahadi, who is the head of the Project Management Office in the Office of the President on this project. There we have the Guyana team. The program says that we will begin with a presentation from Mr. Brassington, but in fact we will vary that slightly. We're going to ask, and I'm going to use first names from now on, Sean, to make the first presentation on behalf of Blackstone.
Natural resources. I'd like to just spend a few minutes here today talking just a bit about the project, why we're here in Guyana, and why we think we can be the right partner for the government on this transformational project. Firstly, a little bit about Blackstone. Blackstone is the largest alternative asset manager in the world. We oversee $230 billion of assets, and very importantly for myself, we spend most of our time working on construction projects just like this one. And just to put it into context, over the last 8 years, I've been involved with about $23 billion of construction or greenfield projects just like this one. Projects spanning from a 250 megawatt hydroelectric dam to 3 power plants in India, 1 power plant in the Philippines, Germany's largest offshore wind park, and just to balance things out, the first natural gas export facility in North America via the Cheniere project. So I come here today in front of you with a fair bit of perspective about global and transformational energy projects. The Sithe Global team, which is our management team that will oversee this project and which has pursued this project for 6 years, has invested $16 million of capital into the development of this project. The Sithe Global team is one of the most experienced power developers in the world. They, just to put that in context, have developed over 80 power plants around the world in 10 countries with 19,000 megawatts of power. So suffice it to say, between Blackstone and Sithe, we come here today as relatively experienced investors understanding many of the challenges that projects like this face in their development cycle and through their construction cycle. Why are we here in Guyana when we could be any place in the world? I think that's an important question. We always look for a few things in our projects. Number one, we look for a country that has underlying growth and where there can be a good public-private partnership with the government. Number two, we look for projects that are the least cost alternative in the countries. There are 3 different studies over time that have been concluded, all of which have pointed to, number one, the Amaila site, and number 2, the Amaila project. So for us, having that least cost project in country is really important. You don't spend $16 million in 6 years of your life working on a project like this unless you believe it is a good thing for the country. And we're here today really to answer any questions you might have and to hopefully resolve some of the concerns and questions that have come up. And so you'll hear from us very explicitly, and we'll come back to this in the coming minutes. But the decision time for the Amaila project is now. This is a project, just to put it into context, that has the ability in year 1 of its operations to save 40% relative to Guyana's current options. Over the first 12 years, the project will save just short of $1 billion for the country. In years 13 to 20, it will save up to 71% off of current generation prices. And after year 20, this asset goes back to the government. And there is no incremental payment to us other than effectively just the operating costs of the plant. So very importantly, this is a project, when you take a look at it over its 100-year life, that will save the country $17 billion, or just over 6 years worth of GDP by one simple project. And so we, simply put, would not have invested $16 million, 6 years of our lives, and all of the effort into this without believing that ultimately this is a good project. There will be many debates about this project, some of which have been raised around construction costs. We can address those concerns and point out the fact that we had 5 international construction firms bid, and that the partner that we've chosen here, China Rail, would be the lowest cost option. Number 2, there have been some concerns about debt and the government support behind the debt for the project. And number 3, there have been some concerns about environmental offsets. What I would like to tell you is when I say that the time to decide is now, it's after 6 years and a lot of work collectively between us and the government that we stand before you today. And what we, just to be very transparent, what we were asking for is a unified consensus view from Parliament on this project, that the country embraces this project, a project which the construction cost of which represents 25% of GDP of the country, is not one that we, Blackstone, or we Sithe want to do without a coalition and a consensus agreement that this is a good thing for the country, which is why we're here today. And then there are 2 requirements of the IDB that will need to ultimately be approved by Parliament. Number one, the environmental offset for the land for the project, and number two, a government support of the underlying debt of the project. So those are two critical things for the IDV portion of the project. We're glad to answer any and all questions as we go through. With this, I'll turn it over to Winston, who can walk through the government's presentation of the project, and then I'll hand it over to Brian. And most importantly, we look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I neglected to advise on our method of engagement today, so I apologize for that. It's our purpose, our primary purpose, to give those of you who are here ample, and I stress ample, opportunity to ask your questions and to express your views to support those questions, or simply to express a view, providing that you don't make a speech. Because we really like to do is give everyone maximum opportunity to participate in this exercise. The media are here, and I'm very pleased to see that. We're going to give the media preference. We will treat it, if you like, to begin with, as a press conference. So there will be no one bias, and everyone given an opportunity to press your concerns, to press your questions. Don't leave here, please, and say I didn't get an opportunity to ask what I wanted to ask and to say what I wanted to say. That's why we're here. And having said that, we will do that when the presentations are finished, rather than in between presentations, because this is meant to be a comprehensive brief. So make your notes, bide your time. When we're ready, we'll open it up. And now, my pleasure to introduce Winston Bassett.
Thank you, Richard. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have Blackstone and Sithe with us make a public presentation on the Amaila Falls project. The last time that Sithe was here and did this presentation was early last year. A lot has happened since then, and so our presentation today will bring you up to speed on all of the key elements of the project. We'll speak of why the project is transformational, the project structure, who are the parties, what's the financing deal, what is government commitments, particularly financial commitments, what are the project benefits. There's been a lot of discussion about what are we getting out of this, and we'll speak to that. We'll also speak to the project risk. What are the key project risks that we're dealing with, and how are they being mitigated, who's handling it? We'll speak to the issue of the government performance guarantee and put it in context. And then a little bit about GPL. And then we'll speak about exactly how much savings GPL is expecting. How much will its costs come down by? How much will its staff come down by? And finally, what are we doing to reform GPL as we move forward with this project? This is a transformational project. It will reduce the cost of electricity. It will improve our macro position. Instead of importing $200 million US in fuel a year, we'll eliminate that and we'll be paying over a 20-year period an average payment of about $100 million US. It will improve our reliability in generation of power. We're adding 165 megawatts of new power. We're building a transmission line from the site all the way to Georgetown that will bring the power in. All of this will result in economic growth, improved competitiveness, foreign direct investment, and these are just some of the benefits. But this project is also an important project in transforming Guyana from being primarily dependent on fossil fuels to being primarily supplied by renewable energy. We'll be a unique country in that with one single project, we can almost entirely move from being entirely supplied by fossil fuels to being supplied by renewable energy. At the same time, the project, with the infusion of 80 million of Norwegian funds into this project as part of the LCDS, will be a true model of public-private partnerships with ecosystem services business. The project is scheduled to have financial close at the end of the year, and construction started at that time. 39 months after that, a little over 3 years, that is sometime in 2017, we expect the project to be completed. This is a BOOT project, a build, own, operate, transfer. At the end of 20 years, the project reverts to the country at no cost. So this is a 20-year BOOT measured from the time the project is completed, so measured from 2017. The project total cost is approximately $858 million. This cost covers all of the costs up to the date of commercial operations. So it's not just the cost of what you pay the contractor, it's all the costs to get you to the day of opening. 60% of this is, 70% of the cost is funded by debt, 30% by equity. Of the equity, Sithe Global will own 60%, the government will own 40%. This is truly a flagship project for the LCDS and will allow us to reduce by about 90% our greenhouse gas emissions. And this project has been recognized internationally by the UN, Secretary General Advisory Group on Climate Finance, as a Pathfinder project. The project structure. This is a typical project finance structure. In the center is the Amaila Falls Hydro Inc., the special purpose company. This is a company that has been incorporated in Guyana that will own the project. On the top center, you see Sithe Global. Sithe will be providing the majority of the equity, along with government on its right. The bottom part shows the debt providers, the China Development Bank, one of the largest Chinese banks with over 800 billion US in assets, and the Inter-American Development Bank, the bank you're all familiar with. All of the power from the project will be bought by GPL through a power purchase agreement or an offtake agreement. The project will be operated after construction by Sithe Global. The project will be built during the construction period by China Rail First Group, a global construction company, under the terms of an engineering procurement contract, otherwise known as the EPC contract. Political risk insurance for Sithe will be obtained through the international markets, and the China Development Bank uses their Chinese insurer, Sinosure, to provide political and commercial risk. Apart from that, we have other agreements in this structure. We have a receivables agreement with Republic Bank that basically controls the revenue of GPL by allocating it first to payments due to Amaila Falls Hydro Inc. and then remitting the balance to GPL. We have a government guarantee, which we'll speak to. We have an implementation agreement between government and Amaila Falls Hydro that describes all of the government obligations and commitments, so tax matters, employment matters, etc. We have a hydro license issued under the Hydro Act. We have an environmental permit issued under the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act. The project structure. Here we show how the cost has changed on this project, and this has been a big ring-fire in the press. Indeed, the price of the project went up from 2009 to 2010. In 2009, we had a recession, and the prices that came in then were more or less at the bottom end of the market. Because of the long period to develop the project, material costs, foreign exchange rates, all of those changed, and the cost of the project went up. As the hard cost of the actual construction cost went up, all of the other costs which is related to that also rose. So the project went from where it was in 2010 of about 700 million. And it's covered everything that will take you to start of operations. It has gone up over 150 million. But during this period, we were also working on ways to reduce the cost of the project to us. That is how much we paid. And so back in 2010, we were looking at an average tariff of about 10.5 cents. And we were dealing with a weighted average cost of capital of about 13%. Today, the weighted average cost of capital is down to below 9%, and the average tariff over the 20-year period is about 9 cents. So whilst the cost has gone up, the price that we pay for power has not gone up. A part of achieving this was we putting more money into the project. We're building the access roads, which is costing us more than we planned. We're putting 80 million of the Norwegian funds. So we're directly investing into Amaila Falls Hydro Inc. more than we were looking at 2 years ago. We're investing over 100 million. In addition to that, the government is putting up certain reserves, security for the project, the debt service reserve account. We have to set up a tolling fee reserve account. So we're setting those up. And apart from that, with our lenders, we have to commit that we will ensure that GPL obtains the financing it needs to implement its development and expansion plan. As a regulated utility, for many years we've been moving forward. We have these plans for the next 5 years investments, but we didn't have the money. As part of the commitment the government has given, it will ensure that GPL obtains the money for our investment plan for the next 5 years. And this will ensure that we become more efficient, we reduce losses. So within 2013 to 2017, we're looking at about 90 million US in capital investment. And in addition to that, whatever shortfall we have in our operating costs will be funded by government. The alternative to that would have been to increase rates. The key project benefits. We've spoken about this project being one that will allow us to reduce emissions by almost 90%. But this project will also have tremendous financial benefits. We're looking at about 200 million a year in fuel savings. And let me quickly tell you the math on those numbers. Amaila Falls is expected to deliver a little over 1,000 gigawatt hours of energy per annum. Last year, our cost of power was about 19 US cents a kilowatt hour. And this is largely fuel. So you take 19 cents and you times it by a little over 1,050 gigawatt hours. And that's how you basically get to your $200 million figure. So this is basically the money that we're spending to buy fuel today, the average cost, times the level of power that Amaila will deliver to us. Now, what are we paying for that? So we're saving on the fuel side, on the generation side, close to 200 million. We're paying about 100 million a year. But because part of the debt is being repaid in the first 12 years out of the 20 years, so part of the debt is being repaid at a faster rate, we actually pay close to 110 to 120 million in the first 12 years, and then that figure drops down in the last 8 years. But over the 20-year period, our average annual payment is below 100 million. And that's fixed for the most part. The financing cost is a major portion of this payment, and that is fixed. There are no changes in that. The only thing that has a slight adjuster is what we call the operating and maintenance cost. And that is 8 million US out of the 100 to 110 million a year. So it's less than 10%. And that would basically be your local labor and so on. Those people, each year, they'll expect an increase. So we have some inflation in those numbers. But it's a very small portion. So for the most part, the payment is fixed. Now, our benefits from this project. Today, our cost of supplying power, measured based on the end user cost, our all-in cost, our generation, our employment, our maintenance, our depreciation, our return on our rate base. Our true cost for GPL, based on last year's numbers, is about 39 US cents a kilowatt hour. Our tariff, what people actually pay, is about 31 cents. That difference is a subsidy, comes in many different forms. With the Amaila Falls Hydro, we will eliminate that subsidy. And those funds that we use for GPL will now be available for use elsewhere in the country. In addition to that, the tariff, the 31 cents that customers pay today, will come down. Our numbers show that tariffs can additionally come down by an additional 20% from where they are today. So we have the benefits from this project is one, we eliminate the subsidy, then we have a tariff reduction. And in addition to that, because our payments are pretty much fixed, we insulate ourselves from increasing fuel prices over time. Everyone has seen the trend in fuel prices, just inflation will tell you fuel prices will go up over time. We're protecting ourselves from that. So the key benefits is we're looking at our subsidy going away, we're looking at our tariffs coming down, we're looking at protecting ourselves from price volatility of fuel. Now the last benefit is, will we be able to, all of these economics, is it right size, is the project right size to GPL? Because if we were having a project that was too big, we'd be paying in essence for a project that we couldn't use all of the supply. But our numbers show, and these numbers have been verified by third parties, that by the time Amaila comes online in 2017, the expected supply from Amaila will be roughly equivalent to the demand. As I mentioned, the supply from Amaila, which is being backed up by hydrology studies of various experts, is being reviewed by the lender's independent engineer and is considered to be reasonable and conservative. Those studies show that we can rely on 1,050 gigawatt hours roughly. Just to give you a sense of that number, if you didn't have any constraints to this project, the installed capacity of 165 megawatts times the hours in a year, 8,760, would give you a theoretical maximum generation from Amaila of about 1,450 gigawatt hours. We are assuming about 1,050 gigawatt hours, taking account of water, taking account of mechanical availability, which has certain guarantees. So that's the supply, 1,050 gigawatt hours per year. It could be higher. What's the demand side of it? Last year, GPL gross generation was 730 gigawatt hours. But that's just GPL. When Amaila comes online, we'll be connecting Linden. Linden has about 70 gigawatt hours a year for the community of Linden and the mining operation. In addition to that, we had a survey done by an international firm 4 years ago. And at that time, they estimated that we have over 600 registered self-generators. And just the top 40, less than the top 40, if they came on, if most of those came on to the grid, we can get 130 gigawatt hours from them. And they did surveys and tested their market and made those assumptions. And then we have growth. So when we add what GPL current demand measured as generation, what Linden would be, what self-generators coming onto the grid would be, what growth between now and 2017 would be, we have a demand that's in excess of 1,000 gigawatt hours. So our supply and demand is basically equivalent. This project will actually reach full utilization within 1 to 3 years of it coming online, and more than likely within the first year. This slide does 3 things. One, it shows what the tariffs would be without Amaila, the top line, and reflects what projections are for fuel prices and how that will move up over time. In the next 20 years, based on these projections, our tariffs could reach 45-50 cents. The middle line, the blue line, shows what our tariffs would be with Amaila. And the difference between the top line and that line shows you the annual savings. The bottom line is strictly Amaila cost, how much we pay. And you would see it goes like a step. At the end of the first 12 years, a major portion of the debt has been paid, and the tariff drops significantly. The numbers show that over a 20-year period, based on projected fuel prices, this project could save us close to $4 billion US dollars. If we could speak to the risk of the project, there's been a huge debate on whether this is a public project or a private project. And in project finance, the risks of the project are allocated. This is first and foremost a private sector project. GPL obligations to pay for power doesn't start until the project is built and comes online. The construction risk is borne by Amaila Falls Hydro Inc. The investors in that company, the equity investors, the debt providers, are taking that risk. Now they pretty much pass that risk on to the contractor, the EPC contractor. And that contractor, China Rail, provides a guarantee that they're going to build this project to certain specifications on a turnkey basis for maximum price, to a fixed price. And secondly, that they'll build it within a certain time. Cost overruns they take. If the project takes longer, they pay liquidated damages. So the contractor is taking that risk, and that contract is with a private company. And GPL is not taking that risk. The one key area that has certain carve-outs is what we call the geotechnical risk. And this is basically the risk that what you assume to be on the ground turns out to be materially different than what you assume, and it has a cost implication. Now, a lot of studies have been done already on that. So with the hydro project, we were advised by our advisors, by site advisors, by independent consultants, that no contractor takes this fully. And so whilst we've had 2 or 3 sets of geotechnical studies, the residual risk is being borne by the project and by the owners of the project. So the project has a contingency in that 858 million of 28 million for contingency, which can cover geotechnical. If we use that contingency up, then it's agreed that both site and government would commit up to an additional 20 million each on a pro rata basis. Site will not get a single cent return from this money, but they will do it, as we would. And anything above that, the government takes. The alternative would be to have the contractor build into their contract a huge contingency, which doesn't work in the best interest of the project. The hydrology risk. GPL is taking this risk. We are taking all of the power from the project. We are assuming that the water is sufficient, and our assumptions are based on third-party studies. The alternative to us taking the hydrology risk was to have the company sell us the power at a fixed price. But we had these discussions, and site said, listen, if we did that, we would pick a low figure that will ensure that we recover all of our funds, and because we're taking that risk, if you want the additional power, you pay for it. So in essence, we'll be paying for it twice. So we said, well, in that situation, we don't want you to have a windfall at our expense. We will take that risk, so we guarantee all of the power, subject to water. Site will be responsible as operator for guaranteeing the availability of the plant. So it has to have at least a 96.5% availability. So all of the equipment and so on, they have to ensure that that availability is guaranteed. If it drops, and we don't get power because that equipment is not available, site takes the hit, or the company takes the hit. But we're taking the hydrology risk, and we believe we have a conservative assumption in our projections. Force majeure. There are 2 types of force majeure. There is the political force majeure. The government changes the law, it nationalizes, basically exchange controls, these sort of things. If we did something like that, we are exposed. We take that risk. Risk. Interest rate risk, foreign exchange rate risk. The interest rates on this project is being locked at financial close. So it's fixed. It's not variable. So if interest rates go up or down in the future, our payment obligations don't change because of that. It's fixed. And these are very long-term loans. You've got 12 years, plus construction, so it's 15. With the IDB, it's 19 years plus construction, it's 22. So your loan tenor is 15 and 22 years. And these are long-term loans, but we lock in the interest rate at financial close. Foreign exchange risk. Our obligation is to pay for the annual payment in US dollars. So we have that exchange rate risk. The contractor, at the date of the contract being effective, they will lock their exchange rate in US dollars. So the payments that the company will make to the contractor is fixed in US dollars. So those are the key risks. Now let's talk about the performance guarantee. This is a backstop for GPL. We are guaranteeing that GPL will perform. The government is guaranteeing that GPL will honor its commitments, specifically its payment commitments, under the power purchase agreement. So GPL receives the power from Amaila Falls hydro. GPL has to pay for that power, that average annual payment. If GPL doesn't pay, the government has to step in and back GPL up. In the worst case situation under the power purchase agreement, there could be a termination of the agreement for GPL's default. GPL stops paying, saying we're not cooperating, we want to take this project. This is an extreme. There is a clause that in termination that will obligate us to buy the project out. So we would have to repay all of the debt because the guarantee is for the debt providers. But we will end up owning the project. So this is a performance guarantee. This is not a guarantee directly of the debt. We're not directly guaranteeing the project debt. If we were doing that and anything went wrong, we would be obligated. If anything went wrong. So let's say they started the project and there were a series of explosions and they abandoned the project. And let's say they spent $400 million. The project isn't built yet. Is the government at risk? No. The project company has that risk. We are only at risk when the power comes online and we have to start paying and we don't pay. So the construction risk on a project like this is being borne by the private investor. They have to take that risk that they properly ensure that they're getting a good price, that the price covers everything, that there's no exposure. The government is not exposed to that. And when you look at how we've done as a country, in the last 20 years, we've reduced our debt to GDP to 1/10 what it was 20 years ago. Our total public debt at the end of 2012 was about 64% of GDP. Similarly, our debt service to revenue coverage has improved significantly. Last year, including external and local debt, it was 9% of GDP. We are not contracting the debt for this project. We're standing behind GPL. And the numbers that GPL sees is that we realize a net savings. But because it's a state entity, government as shareholder is giving a performance guarantee. I'm going to gloss over the rest of the slides, but basically, last year we spent over $500 million in fuel. This project will allow us to save about 40% of that. GPL accounts for over half of it. Linden will come onto the grid. Self-generated will come onto the grid. Our electricity prices in Guyana is low. In Barbados and Jamaica, we would buy it closer to 45 cents. Linden, all of their power comes from diesel. So their cost of generation is not like GPL cost of generation of 19 cents. Their cost of generation is closer to 30 cents a kilowatt hour. GPL has been growing as a company. In the last 8 years, we've increased our customer base by over 30%. We've added 40,000 new customers. Our revenue has been growing. In the last 6 years, our revenue has increased by more than 50%. And much of this is due to increased customer demand, new customers, growth in the economy. But despite all of this, fuel prices have been moving up all the time. Last year, 83% of our revenue went to fuel alone, or 70% of our expenses is fuel. So we really need to get this hydro because we'll be constantly exposed to fuel risk. We have our challenges. Our losses have been stagnating. Although it's come from a high of 44%, It's down to 31.7 at the end of last year. So this is not good. Part of the investment program that we're looking to get from the government will help us to continue to tackle the reduction of losses. When you measure our costs, our true cost is well above our tariff. And you could see that that cost level has hardened in the last few years, as fuel prices at the current level have stabilized at a very high level. With this project, and let me say I'm getting close to finishing. With this project, our cost last year of 38.5 cents, with Amaila, it will come down to 24.8 cents. Our cost is coming down by 36%, our tariffs by 20%. And let me speak to this issue a little bit, because there's been a lot of numbers being thrown around. People say, am I going to get a 30 or 40% reduction in their tariffs? And sometimes they say, am I getting a 30 to 40% reduction in my cost? I can say that you're getting a 30 to 40% reduction in your cost, because your costs are higher than the tariffs and your cost is being subsidized. So the subsidy goes. But then there's also room for tariff reduction. And that tariff reduction, we project, will be about 20%. And let me say that by 2017, when we expect to effect this, it will be close to 10 years in Guyana where there's been a tariff adjustment. The last tariff adjustment was announced in December of 2007, effected in February 2008. So in 10 years, tariff remains stable, and then it comes down with this project. Lastly, between now and the hydro being built, the IDB is working with GPL to improve its efficiency, to improve its management, to improve its capabilities. We have certain benchmarks. This is on the screen. So between support from the IDB, between the investment funding that we'll get from government, with some support from the IDB, we expect GPL to be a much stronger utility by the time the hydro comes online. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Winston. Before I introduce Brian, I know that when we come to question time, many of you are here to ask questions. This is merely a suggestion. There are microphones on all of the front seats. It will make it easier for you and easier for us. If you come down to the front seats and use them, you can do that now or you can do that later. Or we will take a mic to you, but it makes a lot more sense to sit in the front seats. They're not reserved. They're there for those who came to participate. And that includes the press.
And thanks everyone. I realize I'm between you and the key point of this presentation, which is the question and answer. So I will keep this very brief. I think you all know a lot about the high-level details of the project. The cost is $858 million. Southwest of here, and there's a power plant, a T line, a transmission line, and a road are the major components of the project. As Winston said, China Railway is contracted to build it, and I would highlight that the contract has a fixed price that is valid through the end of this year. And that puts some timing pressure on us. After the 13 years of development and 6 years since Sithe has been involved, we have a window within which we can hold prices from China Railway. We cannot do that. Sean spoke before about Sithe Global and Blackstone. We'd be happy to answer any other questions on that, but for the sake of time, I will skip over it. Suffice it to say, Sithe has a lot of hydro experience. I personally lived in the Philippines for a few years as we did a successful 350 megawatt project there. We just recently commissioned a 250 megawatt hydro project in Uganda that has a lot of similarities here to Amaila. This slide I would like to take a moment on. While Winston focused more on the cost savings to the end user, that's somewhat beyond Sithe's purview. What Sithe can talk about are the cost savings. So we'll focus, if you can see this graph, the red line on top is GPL's cost last year. That's just assuming over 100 years that last year's cost of 19 cents to generate power never changed. Fuel prices never went up. If you plot that against the Amaila cost, you can see that in years 1 to 12, the savings is nearly $1 billion US just in generation costs. That doesn't account at all for any fuel price escalation. We don't need to consider whose curves are we using. This is just last year's cost, assuming it never changed. In years 13 to 20, it's a little over $1 billion. In years 21 to 100, $15 billion, a 90% savings. Even in the first years, a 40% savings jumping up to a 70% savings. This is the fundamental reason why Sithe has doggedly pursued this project for so long, because it makes sense. We believe it. We spent $16 million because the project is so fundamentally strong. As Sean emphasized, we don't go in to projects unless we believe it is the least cost option. It has to be something that there's a consensus in the country, this is good for you. Cost is the primary driver for our belief in the value of the project. Key project benefits, I think you know most of these. I actually can go through them quite quickly. In addition to the economic benefits, reliable electricity has a huge economic impact. Our project in Guyana, or in Uganda that went commercial last year has had a 99% availability. I know a lot of issues have been raised whether or not Amaila would be a reliable source of power. In Uganda, with a very similar structure, 99% availability in the first year. It's been said that it's improved GDP by 1.5%. That's strictly by the reliability of power. So businesses that before were either the subject of load shedding or maybe they were producing their own power, now they've come onto the grid, they've focused on making widgets or whatever they make, and they're not worried about backup power. It has had a massive impact, positive impact on the economy in Uganda. Another element that Sean mentioned, I think, is important is this project. It's a flagship project for Amaila. If it goes, it sets a tremendous example for foreign direct investment for the future of the country in any sector. I spoke about Bujagali already. The one thing I would mention here, and I'll touch on it later, I imagine in the Q&A, is the cost. So Amaila, when I said in the beginning, it's really three projects. The road project the government is undertaking prior to the start of construction of the generation facility and transmission line. The transmission line component of this project is massive. It's much larger than what you have in a typical hydro. As a result of that, I think a lot of people have made some apples and oranges comparisons between costs. We compare the total cost of the project Amaila with the road, the transmission line, and the generation facility to just the hard cost of a generation facility. When you pull out the road and the generation and the transmission line, the cost comes down to about $3,600 per kW. That's approximately the same as Bujagali and very similar to world-class hydros, in particular in remote areas and with reservoirs. The benefit of a reservoir is it helps carry you through the dry season. The downside is it costs a little bit more because you have to build a higher dam. But the benefits over the 100-year life of the project far outweigh the slight additional cost. Just some quotes. We'll make this available to the press after the meeting here, but effectively the power company in Uganda here talking about how the project has helped them, and then some international press talking about the GDP impacts. Here, I can suffice to say, Sithe has been putting blood, sweat, and tears and a lot of money into this project for 6 years. And before that, the development had been going on for a cumulative amount of about 13 years. I talk about our costs. This is how we've spent it. It's about $16 million as of today. You see the biggest two components are engineering and environmental. If you want to attract an institution like the IDB, you have to have absolute top world-class engineering, absolute top world-class environmental standards. We've sent hundreds of scientists into the field to study all the environmental impacts. This is a necessary part of bringing an institution like IDB into the project. I'll pause here to make the point that, in part highlighted by the recent discussion in the country and the recent discussions in Parliament about whether or not there is a consensus to support the project, we have had to take a step back and say, it's not good enough for Sithe and Blackstone to be optimistic about this project. It's not good enough for Sithe and Blackstone to believe that this is in Guyana's best interest. The country needs to believe that the project is in its best interest. So from our perspective, it's difficult when there seems to be some question on whether or not the country really wants the project to go ahead and spend the next $4 or $5 million to take us to financial close. So that's really a big part of our visit here today, is to ask that question and get that answer. And in order to get that answer, in order for Guyana to answer that question, I think you probably have some questions for us first. So that's what today is for. But the goal after this is for the country to make a decision, and that is to enact legislation or other means necessary to clear the two hurdles that are required by IDB and CDB. Number one is the environmental offset, and number two relates to the guarantee. We also mentioned on here that finishing the road is a condition to starting the project as well, and that needs to get done by the end of the year. This is a variation of the slide shown by Winston. I don't know that I can say anything more, except because the guarantee is such an important point, I'll reiterate here that Guyana is not being asked to guarantee the debt of the project. Guyana is not standing behind the debt of the project. Guyana is standing behind GPL's performance. If GPL performs, the guarantee is irrelevant. Here's estimated project sources and uses. Every time I've been here, we've presented a slide like this. It's disappointing that every year these numbers go up. And the reason they go up is because as you take 6 years to develop a project, when it can't get finished in time, the price goes up. And that has a knock-on effect. So when the foreign exchange moves, that drives the EPC price up, that drives the financing costs up. Here we are today. If we miss the the December 31st date, these numbers would move substantially again. That is a big part of our urgency here, why we think action needs to be taken soon. Just a quick summary of where we stand. The EPC has been signed, as I said before. IDB is doing due diligence full speed, including the environmental. And we have a board date set for October 30. October 30 is really a drop-dead date, because if we don't get the board approval then, we risk the Norwegian money that the government is counting on to use as a source of its investment to the project, and we risk the EPC price validity. Without those two things, there's probably not a project. I would point out that I've talked quite a lot about what Sithe has done. China Railway also, entirely independent from their activities on the road, has spent, I would say, approximately $10 million of their own money. They're out in the field right now doing engineering work, collecting samples on geotechnical. They have a full team in place. This is all entirely at their own risk. Guyana has not given anybody any guarantees about all this development work. That's all because, like us, they believe the project makes sense. Next steps. We talked a moment ago. A condition for us to proceed is that the country demonstrates that it does want the project. That there is consensus amongst the major groups that the project is good for the country. I mentioned already the road completion requirement as well as the IDB timing. So I think I will wrap it up here. I have a few appendices based on reports we've seen in the press. To the extent this is helpful as we go through the Q&A, we can revert back to some of this as reference material. But thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Winston. This is how we're going to do this. I'm going to take the media first. I was glad to see them take up the front seats. After that, we'll open it up completely. That does not mean to say the media cannot come back in later if they have some additional thoughts in mind. And I'm very glad to see other personalities now coming down. It makes it all easier for everybody else, so that's great. So, shall I give you a minute? Anybody dying to ask questions, come up, fill up in front.